Cameron Stewart, joining Locked On Big 12. Florida State and Clemson. They didn't want to come to the Big 12. This was not the plan. When the first murmurs of these two suing the ACC came out, it was obvious the Big Ten, the SEC. There has to be an offer somewhere from a third party on the table, and somebody out there screaming at their car, right, and throwing things like, "Well, there couldn't be an offer." That's what's when it's unscrupulous when you go in and fraud or tampering. Sure, yes, that's the word. Right. The front office of the SEC could not call Florida State and say, "Hey, we want you." That's illegal. But there are third parties who made it very clear, obviously, that these two schools had a landing spot somewhere, so they sued the ACC. Now that landing spot's the Big 12, which is not bad for us, by the way. Florida State playing Baylor in a conference game. This has to be the most desperate these two schools could possibly ever be.
Yeah, we'd have the Big 12 in this scenario would have the two best football programs in Florida, Florida State and UCF. So that would be huge for the brand. And yeah, so it kind of goes against what we were saying a little bit in the last segment, but it rings true in terms of it goes against us saying, the Big 12 is in a great stable spot. It is. Yeah. Don't get me wrong. But again, Florida State and Clemson, if they had their first choice, this likely isn't it. Right. It's the third choice. So that shows you the desperation that they have right now to get out. And I've seen some reports in terms of, this great media deal, which we know the Big 12's got a great media deal, and how that feels like they're on the cutting edge for the next few years. But and that's probably true, but it's still not the Big Ten or the SEC in general.
Correct.
It's just not.
With these two, it still won't be the SEC. Right. But it certainly pushes closer to being the Big Ten. We give the Big Ten a whole lot of flowers for having three schools. And you can argue that, Penn State being the third school is just not that crazy. Can I say something just wild right now?
Sure. Yes.
Clemson, Penn State, West Virginia. They're all kind of the same school. 14 years ago, it's 2010. Mm-hmm. Would you rather have Clemson or West Virginia in your conference?
Oh, that's a tough one.
It's definitely West Virginia. It's definitely West Virginia. They were a huge expansion candidate, and Clemson made less football revenue than Bowling Green in 2010.
They had some tough years.
They were not good. They were not good. West Virginia was. What this is winning. When you win 2 national championships, as Clemson has done, you take a brand that is on par with Utah or Kansas State.
Utah's another great example. Yeah.
Give them 10 years what Clemson has done for the last decade. And granted, it's tough to take that away. But in the history of college football, no one's ever looked at Clemson and said, I want that. Oh, recruiting hotbed. No, not really. Oh, Clemson, they've got the biggest brand in the state. Nope, they're not the school of the state. This isn't an almighty powerhouse program that so many people have made it out to be.
I mean, yes, you're right. And that the last 10 years have been the saving grace of Clemson's football's history. I know they won a championship in, I think, 1980, but
91, I think it was 91.
91?
It was like Colorado. Maybe
Colorado.
You finish your
So yeah, now I don't know where I was going with it, but that was probably for the best. But all that to say,
historically not great. 81.
And I've had these thoughts. I've had these thoughts about West Virginia in terms of a program, and thinking, is the Big 12 just like a step too far for West Virginia? In terms of what they're able to accomplish. And I don't know I'm not 100% on that. But I would have the same thought about Clemson in an SEC. Absolutely. That's probably just a bridge too far for these guys. At their very best, they could have competed in it, right? I mean, absolutely. They would have been, the main challenger to Alabama, the way Georgia was for years and LSU was for years. And I don't know, though, that I would say they would get over the hump the way Georgia did, or LSU with Burrow. You know what I mean? I don't know that I could say that. So I think from that standpoint, that's not unfair. And look, Clemson has built that brand the last 10 years to where they are sexy to other conferences. But I'm also, let's not kid ourselves in thinking this dynasty is rolling on at Clemson. In fact, I don't think it's going in the right direction. Of those two, the Clemson and Florida State, if I had to pick just one, it's no contest, man. It's Florida State all day long, and they had some really down years when Clemson was winning national championships. But the way Clemson has embraced NIL, you thought Baylor was bad, Baylor was slow with it. Look at Clemson, man. That's going down the wrong side of the highway.
Yeah. It's interesting to me that Clemson, who we've now touted as one of the top expansion schools in America, doesn't do the transfer portal, really. And by the way, has not been winning at a high clip the last couple of years. Like they've gone through a couple of rough seasons, and then they still don't do the portal. And two, they don't do NIL unless it's God's name, image, and likeness, which I can only think when God heard that, because he hears all, he was like, oh, I gave you NIL to use.
I was going to say, it's like the guy who's drowning, right? I sent you 3 boats. It's like, I sent you all this money. Like, what are you doing, man? Giving
you the opportunity to be rich and prosperous.
Clemson, in terms of how they look in expansion, is really like a luck of the time. I'm not saying they were lucky to get to a dynasty. They got there. But if that was North Carolina instead, we would want North Carolina. We wouldn't want Clemson.
Miami. You know?
Yeah. Even a couple years ago, before the Norvell turnaround, we might have said, I'd really like Florida State too. I know they were 4-8 last year, but I'd really like Florida State. Right. You know what I mean?
But you don't get
Virginia Tech instead of Clemson.
The day that Clemson goes
very similar.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
10, 15 years ago, I want Virginia Tech. That to me is the Clemson deal. It's the year they suck, the year they go 4-8. You look around the room and go, "Do we really need that? Was that really like ooh?" That's what the SEC. If
Virginia Tech's a college football playoff team a few years ago, 5-6 years ago, maybe not even national championship. You're like, I'd really like that.
We're talking expansion
of all those things that you mentioned.
2008, you want Boise State, you want USF, like that's the equivalent of the Cincinnati and the Houston you just brought on.
Yeah,
you know, you want Miami and Virginia Tech, not a Clemson. Coming up, who else comes with these two? We mentioned Virginia Tech. Maybe they're on the table on Locked On Big 12, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel is where I go. I think, oh man, rent's coming up this month. Good thing FanDuel exists, and I can go bet on the Texas Rangers, which sometimes hits now. Used to, it didn't at all, but now they're starting to win. They just won a series against the Astros. This summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's something for everyone, every day, all summer long. Head to FanDuel.com and start making the most of your summer. FanDuel is the official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Pitcher props, player props, batters, and home runs and hits and all that jazz. FanDuel.com/locked on. Go there today.